Call our November the 25th, 2019 special session meeting in order. Facility needs and restart reform, modifications and state reports meeting. First of all, I'd like to welcome our Board of Education staff members, administrators that are here today and ones that are listening. Happy Thanksgiving on behalf of the board. I pray safety to all families and students that will be traveling to see their families, and I think we all have something to be thankful for. So happy Thanksgiving on behalf of the Board of Education. We do have a quorum, all 7 board members here today. No better way to start our board meeting with the invocation by Tracy Zukowski and our Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Peggy Smith. May we all stand, please. Dr. Coates.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Board Chair, Madam Vice Chair, board members, and Dr. Cosby. As you know, we have 6 schools in the Restart Reform Model, and the Department of Public Instruction each year prior to December 1st asks us to file a report based on the flexibilities that they implemented in the previous school year. So that is the purpose for tonight's meeting. We have, and just for clarity, year 1 means the first year of implementation. When schools select the Restart Reform Model, they have a planning year, then the first year is year 1 of implementation. So the year 2 schools would be in year 2 of implementation. As a matter of just note, 3 of our 6 Restart Reform schools have new principals in there this year. So what the purpose of tonight is the reflection on the flexibilities that were used last year and to take that report and get that approved and send it to the Department of Public Instruction. To assist you with additional information, if you look in your orange folders, we have given you a lot of data, and most of this data you already have, but not pulled together. So in your orange folders, you have some additional data that is pulled together for each of our Restart schools. So if you look at the first page, that is school performance grade summary data for 3 years for our Restart schools. Notice if they're color-coded by the planning year, whether it's year 1 implementation or year 2. The next thing in the packet is an individual report from each school. And again, this is data you have, but it's all over your data notebook, so Ms. Stevenson pulled it together to you today for convenience. And if you will look at that, you will notice the color coding on page 1 is cohort data so that you can follow that over time. Performance data at the top for all students that were tested. Reading, of course, by grade, math by grade, and again, so that you can look at that as cohorts. And if you look on the second page, that is your EVOS data based on by the past 4 years. Of course, that is that 80% achievement, 20% growth. That's where school performance grades come. And then we've included math performance and reading performance, and then at the bottom you will see some indicators by subgroup. So that is just simply for your convenience as we look at different schools. So Ms. Tamar Thomas, our Director of School Improvement, has been working closely with these schools. So she is going to walk you through a PowerPoint presentation on what we have done, what the schools have done, the efforts we've made to support our Restart schools more. One of those being, of course, a draft handbook. We've not had a Restart model handbook, so we're trying to put that together for our folks. So as you have questions, if you would note those, our Restart reform principals are here to answer specific school-based questions, but at this time I'd like to call Ms. Thomas to the podium to present to you our report and other information. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. Good evening. How are we doing? Good. All right. Well, I'm hoping to not be before you long. I know that some of you had the opportunity to look at the presentation, and we want to get to the place where we can determine these are the modifications, these are the flexibilities that the schools have been using, and collaborate on that approval piece so that we can send their reports to the state. Each year, NCDPI has determined that an annual report on our reform schools will be submitted by December 1st, and this is all a part of our process. We have 4 schools that are in year 1, and then 2 schools in year 2. The 2 that are in year 2 both have new principals this year, and not new principals, but new to their school, very experienced principals, as well as our Selma Middle School, who also has a very experienced district leader and school leader. The purpose of the report, as per DPI, is really to look at all of the flexibilities that schools have been using. And so they're putting together teams at DPI where they can look at how have flexibilities been used across the state? Because this is something that they have not really had the opportunity to examine in the past. And so they're organizing in such a way where they recognize flexibilities have not been made very clear to all of the districts because they're still seeking clarity themselves. But at the same time, there are about 6 flexibilities that schools and districts have been operating with, and they want to see the trends in the use of those flexibilities. So that's what we're here to look at this evening as well. Those who are involved in the completion of the report, we have school leadership, of course, and then you have your district personnel and the school board, because again, this is a collaborative piece that we're working on. Historically, I'm not too clear on how collaborative it has been, but knowing that we have new leaders in some of our buildings, it's important to make sure that moving forward, it's clear to everyone, what are those flexibilities? What can we do? What can we not do? And just kind of move forward in that vein. So these are those who were involved in the report process so far. I won't read through the list of names. And DPI, as I shared earlier, their current work involves developing clarity around the flexibilities. And so for us as a district, as Dr. Coates had shared earlier, we didn't have a Restart handbook. And so I've been in the process of putting a draft handbook together. Important to note that it's a draft in the sense that I've been able to get information from DPI in different areas, and also looking at, we had a presentation we received from North Carolina Association of School Business Officials. So we use information compiled from that as well, and put that information together, just looking for all the resources we can possibly find while DPI is in the process, as they shared during their October State Board meeting, that they are looking to put that clarity together around the flexibilities. We still need something we need to operate with in the meantime. In the collaborative process, we also had a Google folder that was prepared for each school, and through that we collaborated using the data that you have before you, as well as looking at the actual report that was given to us by DPI. There were one-to-one meetings, and I think that what was really wonderful was the opportunity to work with with Tabitha, who was our director for finance, and Mr. Art Stanley and Mr. Vitrano. We worked with various individuals, and I know Dr. Coates was with us the entire time, and Suzanne Mitchell, who is our CIA officer, has been very involved as well. And so with that, they were part of those meetings and helping to answer those questions for us and support us. And then one-to-one principal support meetings, of course. So these are the sections of the report. We have general information. You have a Section A overview of the district support, Section B flexibilities, goals and metrics, Section C, and Section D, and then the last section are signatures. What I've done is extract for you, make life much simpler, what are the modifications we're looking at, what are the flexibilities the schools had in their original application, what did they use in 2018, 2019, because that's what DPI is looking to see. What was used from the original application as far as restart? And then if there are modifications that the schools are seeking to have. So our year 2 reporting schools, we'll start here. 6 flexibilities: assessment, budget, funding, calendar, class size, curriculum, and employment, licensure requirement, or staff restructure. And I did make a note on the slide. It says each school has presented their improvement plan and will continue implementing those strategies that were previously highlighted during our board meetings in October and in September. So really, when we're looking at the restart, we're just looking at the flexibility piece. We've kind of isolated that piece. But their school improvement plan speaks to the work that they're doing in these areas. And so Cooper Academy, they did use the budget funding, and the calendar flexibility was in their original application. What they used last year would have been the calendar flexibility, as you can see. So the way it was written in the original application, it was implemented, and it provided additional opportunities for professional development on early release days, and that was built into the school's calendar each week. Now, when we look at what they're looking to do for this year, what they want to continue doing, the calendar flexibility is one area where they did see improvements in instructional practices. And so the school, well, let me backtrack. There were some school budget shortfalls, and so the calendar flexibility was for this year. They did use it last year, and so moving forward, they want to regain the flexibility. So let me make sure I'm clear. They want to regain it at this point based on funding as we move forward, because we know there have been some issues with that piece. For class size flexibility, this piece is contingent upon funding as well. They're looking to reduce class sizes on certain grade levels, so that would be K4 and 5 for 2020 and 2021. They also want to employ target tutors to work with targeted low-performing subgroups. And for the assessment flexibility, they've already vetted this modification through their CIA officer, which would be Suzanne Mitchell, and other district officials. The school developed a screener for kindergarten students. So the thing is, even though this flexibility was requested and they are using it, the thing is, it has worked for them. They have a plan that's been vetted for how they're going to screen their kindergarten students. And this is something they want to continue doing. And so the modification has already been vetted by the CIA officer and other district officials, and it has met that approval. Okay. For North Johnston Middle School, in their original application, budget, funding, calendar, curriculum, and employment or licensure flexibilities were in the original application. For the 2018-2019 school year, none of those were used. And again, I remind you that the principal at North Johnston Middle School, which is Ms. Heather Anders, is new to the school this year, but not new to leadership. And so what they're looking to do is to continue to utilize licensure flexibility for certain staffing needs, just where needed. The calendar flexibility, they would like to regain that in 2020, 2021, contingent, of course, upon school board approval and funding. The budget flexibility is contingent upon funding as well. They want to utilize budget flexibility to provide extended employment opportunities for specified staff. So that might look like an after-school tutoring for the students, but then specified staff would mean they would use data to determine which staff are eligible or qualified to really serve the students that need the most support the best way, right? I mean, strategically speaking. And so the school improvement plan, of course, as we shared for all schools, already outlines the strategies and actions necessary to improve overall achievement. Moving into our year one schools. Benson Elementary School, in their original application, budget funding, calendar, curriculum, employment licensure, staff restructure was in the original application. For 2018-2019, they did use the curriculum flexibility, and they did use the budget funding flexibility. So that budget funding flexibility was used to hire a curriculum and MTSS coach, whereas the curriculum flexibility was used to allow the math team to develop pacing guides. And the beautiful thing about those pacing guides and the lesson plans and the other things that they ventured into with this flexibility was that they saw gains in proficiency and growth, and those were shared during the previous board meetings back in September and October. And so they definitely want to continue using that. So when we see calendar flexibility, Benson Elementary School will offer an additional 2.5 PD days in the calendar through this modification to focus on teacher development and content knowledge delivery expansion. With the curricular flexibility, again, the math team will continue to reflect, adjust, and implement developed pacing guides and lessons using the district curriculum as a supplement across grade levels. For the assessment flexibility, this modification was already vetted through their CIA officer, and so they have a screener, but it's not limited to one grade level. Their screener is for all of their grade levels. And so this modification, as I shared, has already been vetted, and it's working well for them. Staff restructuring class size flexibility, Benson Elementary School will continue to provide staff to reduce classroom sizes through this modification. And then the funding flexibility says contingent upon district budget. They would like to continue to fund a curriculum and MTSS coach to support their teachers. And as we see, it has worked for them. Okay. For Benson Middle School, the original restart application included budget funding, calendar, curriculum, employment, licensure, and staff restructure. As far as the flexibilities used, here, even though the calendar flexibility was not used, Benson Middle School did use the approved restart calendar, which did offer them a extra full PD days. And then for employment and licensure flexibility, staff restructure, although this flexibility was used, it was used later on in the year, last year, so it was too soon to actually determine what type of impact using that flexibility would have had, okay? Next steps for Benson. Licensure flexibility, they want to continue to utilize that for certain staffing needs. I know that was used this summer as well to retain 2 really good teachers at the school. And for curricular flexibility, they want to ensure that professional development is aligned to the implementation of Marzano Academies, because they are a Marzano Academy school. And please note that this modification option will include state-mandated compliance areas. And so what they're looking at are different areas that, say for instance, like AIG, that is supposed to be included in the Marzano Academies, but that's something that is being discussed, again, with CIA and different district-level individuals to determine, hey, let's vet this. Let's make sure we have what we need in place. As well as for the assessment flexibility, opting out of NC final exams. Again, these are not required next year, but we wanted to include that piece. And opting out of MAP testing and utilizing Empower software and NC check-ins for benchmark assessments. Even though this hasn't been vetted yet, they are in the process of having those conversations. We feel that's very important to have, and that would be a modification. Okay. For Selma Middle School, in the original application, budget funding, calendar, curriculum, employment licensure, and staff restructure were included. And so for 2018 and 2019, the one that was used is employment staff restructuring flexibility. And it allowed new staff to join Selma Middle School, which was critical in a time when there was some turnover happening at the school. For the 2019-2020 school year, leadership has used EVOS historical and classroom observation data to make teacher assignment decisions. And so next steps for Selma, for the calendar and scheduling flexibility, they want to continue to utilize this for the student development time block, which is included in their schedule, because they've noticed a positive impact during this school, during last year. And for employment staff restructuring flexibility, they want to continue utilizing this for staffing needs in alignment with student learning needs. For West Smithfield Elementary School, in the original application, the flexibilities were budget funding, calendar, curriculum, and employment licensure. Employment, licensure, and staff restructure flexibility, this was used. And so it created a more diverse staff population at the school. And when you look at their panorama survey results, you can see a positive impact of having a diversified staff, a more diversified staff at the school, where children can look at people who actually look like them, right? And they feel more welcome at the school. So here we have next steps for West Smithfield Elementary School. Calendar flexibility, they want to regain this flexibility in 2020, 2021, contingent, of course, upon school board approval and funding. The class size flexibility, again, contingent upon funding. The school will use this modification to reduce class sizes in grades K4 and 5 in 2020, 2021, and though it's not there, they're looking to do that across other grades after that. And for curricular flexibility, this modification allows them to continue using the Fontes and Pinnell as their core literacy curriculum. And then the assessment flexibility, this modification was already vetted through their CIA officer. They have developed a screener for all students, grades K through 5, and it is comparable to the NCDPI's kindergarten assessment. And so, again, as I shared, it has already been vetted through their CIA officer and other district officials and meets their approval. Yes.
Questions?
Yes.
I heard a repetitive piece in everybody's want list, I guess, is calendar flexibility. So a couple of questions is how and what are they proposing for calendar flexibility? You know, I've been a proponent, advocate for this since it started. My wife teaches at North Johnston Middle School. My daughter went through North Johnston Middle School. And I've said a long time in these when we talk about restart, and Ms. Anders has done a fantastic job this year, but nothing really changed outside of what I saw. I guess the mic is not working. Test, okay. We have one that was on there, and I know Mr. Baker's going to do a fantastic job this year, and we won't get off of that, so I'm not even worried about that. But my whole thing is, what is the DPI stating to us, you know, from curriculum standpoint, what have we done in the past? It looks like we really haven't had a major curriculum shift, right? So, and I know that they've been in here and given us all of their proposals and what they're doing, and I know they're going to do a fantastic job. But my whole point is, I'm very concerned about just being, you know, labeling as restart, but we have to have some direction, and not having a handbook, you know, and we've had schools in it for 2 years now. It's very scary because it's like we don't have the roadmap. So I've got 100% confidence in every one of the administrators who are in here for each school. I'm not saying anything about them. It's just concerning to make sure that we get on the right path. I think we have the right people in the seats. But so calendar flexibility, how are they going to utilize it? What is it going to look like? But more importantly, what else do we need to do as a board to get in the ditch and dig that trench with them to make sure that we can get them on the right path?
Thank you for your question. I think part of that has to do with No, it is a very good question. I think it, thank you, Dr. Coates. It is the fact that we even have a curriculum this year is one of our first steps to direction. And Restart is one of those things where it's like, okay, how can we get there? But overall, good protocol for a district is having the curriculum. And we have that in place, and we're still building on that piece. To your point regarding the calendar flexibility, with the schools that are making that request, it's going to look different at each school based on what they're looking to achieve at their school. Someone may want a calendar flexibility to extend a particular day and to have more PD days. Someone may want it to do year-round. Not certain, but it's a matter of determining what does that flexibility need to look like at that individual Restart school, and how can we come together to support that school to see what is the plan to improve outcomes for all of our children using that flexibility. We can want it, but how is it going to serve our children? That's where we come together and collaborate on that piece.
Thank you. I guess too, this past year, all the Restart schools, in their feeder pattern, we let them follow that same calendar. So that's something we got to look at too, is do we continue that? I know that teachers may teach down in live in Meadow, but work in Cleveland, and they're on two different calendars, like it was the first year. So that's something we have to think about as a board. I want to do what's right for everybody, and every, teachers that may teach at a different school, but their students be on a different calendar. That's something we'll have to talk about. But I think it's, I know the first year, North Johnston Middle, they got out at like 1 o'clock and had PD every afternoon on Fridays. Like I said, I think Ms. Anders is the right person at that school, as well as the others in this room. But anything we can do to help, we're all about it, and just making sure that we can do what's right for the students.
Definitely appreciate, we're on the same page then, for sure. Thank you.
Just to the calendar point, as long as it was individual schools, it seemed to work better than when we went to feeder patterns. But when we went to feeder patterns, there were 4 feeder pattern districts that were on different calendars than the other 4 high schools. That creates a problem for bus drivers. It creates a problem for scheduling for events that are shared in those patterns. So when the board rescinded the calendar flexibility, it wasn't without deep thought and trying to make the district calendar work for the district. So I'm not sure where we are in the process of submitting alternate calendars, but I would like to see some proposals before we said we were going back to this flexibility, not out of any disrespect for the schools, but out of ultimate respect for the district and maintaining some consistency with the calendar. I'm like Todd, I'm a proponent of individual calendars. I'm for year-round calendar for many years, as long as it's not a 4-track system. But if we can somehow share buses and share resources in a way that makes sense, then I'd be interested in seeing some proposals. But it wasn't out of any kind of not liking the idea. It was just that it wasn't working for the transportation system, for the child nutrition. There were all of our subsidizing, supporting entities that it just wasn't helping the district move forward. So thank you for that.
Ms. Sessoms?
Yes. First of all, thank you for your attention to this. It's wonderful that we have someone who is focused on pulling all of our Restart schools together and giving them the support that they need. And I want to thank you all for pulling the data together. The classroom performance, that's what it's all about. The whole point when you look at Restart is improving academic performance. And so as you move throughout your year, not just planning for next year, but as we move throughout this year, making sure that we keep our eye on that target, that it's about those test scores and what they look like at the end of the year. That's what we'll be looking at to determine whether that flexibility is working. It'll be data-based. Not because we like or dislike a certain flexibility, but, is it working for the kids, and how do we know that? And then the class reduction. I look at class size reduction, and I get it, because I was one of those second grade teachers that back in the day, before there were any hard, fast limits on class size, I had 32 second graders in my classroom. And so I completely understand class size reduction, but let's make sure that our teachers are not doing the exact same things with fewer kids. Otherwise, we'll continue to get the same results that we've been getting. So if they're using the same strategies that they did with 20 kids and now they've got 16, but they haven't changed their instructional practices, it's not going to make a difference. So I would just encourage everyone to think about how do we use these flexibilities, and what are we going to be doing differently with those flexibilities to make a difference.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think it all goes back to frequency and intensity with a certain subgroup that tends to be on the short end of the stick a lot of times in our school system. And if we go back to 2017, we looked at the cost and we estimated that it was $150,000 to $200,000 that was additional to keep certain schools year round. And I say it always goes back to frequency and intensity. How long can you stay in front of that child to teach them? So that is where the calendar flexibility was a huge asset. And if you go back to 2017, we were on a slow but steady course upward. The test scores were improving, the school grade was improving. But when we transitioned from the year-round calendar to the traditional calendar, well, you can see the results now. I mean, I think we've seen, I hate to say historic, but we've seen almost historic dives in our scores, yeah, and that's fair to say, because you lack that frequency and intensity. So thank you for everything you've done to put this report together. I do have one question for North Johnston, and I've been accused by my wife of hearing what I want to hear, but I didn't want to hear this, but I thought you said it. Did you say that the modifications or the protocols were not followed in year one? I wanted you to go back over the first slide in the North Johnston.
I can get there, Sue. So for North Johnston Middle School, and so in the original application, as we saw, they had 4 flexibilities that they were using, they were requesting in the original application. Based on those requests, they were not used in 2018, 2019. And it's also important to recognize that the principal, Ms. Anders, is new to the school this year as well, right? And so when we look at those flexibilities reported in the original application, but then for 2018-19, which is what DPI wants to see, which ones did you use out of those? There were none. But when we look at how they want to move forward, the licensure flexibility, they want to use it for certain staffing needs. So when we think about that, that could be the same way that Benson Middle School used this flexibility for staffing needs and was able to retain certain teachers, or maybe tap into a pool that they might not have been able to tap into without having that licensure flexibility. The calendar flexibility, they wanted to regain that for 2020, 2021, again, contingent on school board approval and funding. We found it to be very critical to make sure we highlight the fact that it's all based on school board approval, because we know that you all have done extensive work and extensive research into that calendar flexibility as well in the past. And so we wanted to just mention, hey, is this something that we want to continue using? And just a request to regain the flexibility. It will look different at each school if they make that request.
Sure. So a couple things. I worked with Heather Anders for, I've known nothing but success and respect in any school she's been in that I've been a part of. So thanks for that. But to fully understand, they requested, received, but didn't utilize. Am I correct in assuming that, or am I incorrect?
That would have been for 2018, 2019. So budget funding, calendar, for last year.
Okay. Last question. We talked about Selma Middle School and the flexibility in removing staff and adding new staff. And I know you don't know this, and nor would Mr. Baker, but I would like to get a percentage on the staff that was replaced. Because, having that steady constant in your workforce is a huge detriment to success, and you want people to get acclimated without removing them before they get acclimated. So I was just curious to try to find out what percentage of the staff was not asked back and was new staff. If we could find that out and somebody just shoot me an email, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Mr. Baker, if you could get that for all of our restart schools, I think the board would be interested in that. I don't know who, I say you because I see you sitting back there and Mr. Johnston mentioned it, but if we could get that, that would be great for all our restart schools.
For different schools, depending upon when they utilize that. And we can certainly collaborate with the principals and Brian to get that for you.
Or delegate it, Mr. Baker. That's right, he is at Selma. Sorry about that, it has been a long day for me. It just got delegated to Dr. Coates, so thank you. Ms. Grant, I'm used to saying your name.
Just to piggyback off of Mr. Johnson's comments, when the principals were presenting, the ones that originally had the year-round calendar, when they came off the year-round calendar, they either picked up the IB program or the AVID program. And when they made their presentations, that was one of my questions was, have you seen the benefit for IB, AVID versus the year-round? And no one wanted to say one was better than the other. So funding, we need additional funding to do something like year-round calendar. We also need that funding to keep IB and AVID that no one wants to give up either. So there's a lot of moving parts that are going to play into this because we don't want to give up one for the other either, and not sure how we're going to come up with to do both, but both are very important.
But let's keep this a collaborative process, and I think that's going to help us moving forward for sure.
And thank you for all you're doing.
No problem.
So I have something to say. I just wanted to, again, thank everyone that's here tonight. I know that a lot of time and work has been put into the planning for all of our restart schools, and anybody who knows me, student growth is my number one priority. I spent a good solid week in Colorado in October learning about competency-based learning and Dana's Marzano Academy. And to me, it's important that we are changing what we're doing, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again with more intensity or with more frequency. So we are here in a county right now that is not showing growth across the board, across the board. And change is going to be imperative as we're looking at these restart schools. So a flexible calendar is great, but it's got to come with purpose, right? Class size is great, but it's got to come with purpose. There's a reason. It's not just that we have the opportunity to take advantage of all these things because of restart status. That's great, extra stuff in our stockings. But if we don't have a plan and data that backs that, and we don't unpack it, and we don't look at it, and if we don't do anything with it, we're still going to get the same results. So I know that you guys are working hard, and I appreciate you and I applaud you for doing that. I'm with everyone else. We really want to see the change.
I just have one last thing I overlooked to note is how lenient is DPI on principal changes? Obviously, North Johnston Middle has had a principal change ever since they've been in the Restart program. So are they lenient on that based upon the changes? Or, I think I know the answer, but I'm just asking it. Are they just saying, no, you put in a restart, your application, here's what we're going to do, and you've got this time period to get out?
I believe, having come from DPI myself and worked with that same division, district and regional support, that they do consider how long a principal has been in place. We can't look outside of the context of how long leadership has been in place. We recognize that leadership brings some level of stability. And when there has been turnover in leadership, that's something that no one wants to smile upon. But when we're looking through the lens of Restart, that's definitely something that they take into consideration when they're looking at the longevity of the school, the things, the flexibilities that are being used, the quality of the implementation for those flexibilities. And typically, the question that is asked through district and regional support is, that's nice that you're doing that. What impact is it having on outcomes for the children in North Carolina? Where is the plan? How are you going to measure that? And to your point, it's not enough to just say, I want this flexibility. I agree. It is not. And so it's always, what impact will it have on outcomes for our children? We want that impact to be positive. How are you going to measure it? We don't wait till the end of the year to look at the data to say, okay, this is how we've done. We want to strategically measure that throughout the year. And so nothing is arbitrary. And the hope and desire and expectation is that as we continue to look at our continuous school improvement plans, that they will continue to evolve and meet the needs of students in the ever-changing life of the school. No problem.
Any more questions?
Just one last question. The new ELA curriculum resource materials, are those being used and embraced within our Restart schools in particular?
I would say we have one school that's using, two schools that have the curriculum flexibility. And so, like the Fontes and Pinnell is being used in West Smithfield, right? It doesn't mean that they're not embracing it. What happens at that school is they had to put something in place when they didn't have something in place yet. And so it wouldn't make financial sense to just ditch it now that we have that curriculum, HMH in place. And so they've continued to use that piece. The other schools that don't use that flexibility are embracing the HMH. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that clarification, Ms. Moose.
If the board approves these, it doesn't mean, like if we approve calendar flexibility and we determine that that's not something we can do, it just means we don't implement it. It doesn't hold us to the requirement to implement it. Am I correct?
Which is why we use the language contingent upon school board approval, funding.
So what would we be voting on tonight to go to the state?
And so if a school has a modification in place, like at the top sheet for each school would list what we're going to be voting on, or approving, I should say, at this point. And so if they have a calendar flexibility, we'll use the North Johnston as an example, because that came up before. It says request to regain this flexibility in 2020, 2021, contingent on school board approval and funding. And so when we look at flexibilities, when we look at modifications, we want to be sure that it's written somewhere and that schools are not just doing whatever and it's not documented anywhere. And so the fact that we've had this meeting and shared what they're looking to do, if we come to a juncture in the spring where the funding is available, they can move forward and do what needs to be done because it was contingent upon that funding. But if it's not available, then there's a strong possibility that they may not be able to do that. So that's what we're looking at.
So this is totally a newbie question.
Sure.
So the data that you have up there where you say reporting year 18-19 used, did not use, those are what they checked last year that they wanted.
Correct.
And then you're telling us whether they used them or didn't use them. So it's almost like everybody said, we want to use everything because we want a solution. And I'm just looking at everything that was offered to them and they didn't get to use. Correct.
Option 2, yes.
So now, this year, and what you're putting before us is more strategic, more defined. Yep.
Yes.
For example, Benson Elementary wishes to use calendar flexibility to offer an additional 2.5 professional development days. You're not suggesting that your calendar look different. You're saying you will use the calendar that we are adopting, I guess, next month, differently than the schools.
So again, that calendar flexibility would just be based on how that school plans to use those 2.5 days.
That's what I'm saying. Ms. Johnston says they will offer 2.5 additional PD days. My question is that 2.5 extra days, or are those days that, like, I think Mr. Sutton said, are they optional that will become required? Are these days added to the end of the school year? Are these student days that are not going to be used as student days, that are going to be used as professional development days? Because we cannot take instructional time away from students.
Hours built into our calendar so that students are in school a little bit longer throughout the week on student days, so that they're not missing that chunk of time during the professional development days. It also it's very meaningful for our teachers when they come into a professional development session at the beginning of the day, opposed to halfway through the day when they dealt with the students and they have parent phone calls to make and all these other things on the brain, and they're not really embracing and taking in the information that we're presenting. So our plan was to bring them in for a full day, fresh at the beginning of the morning, and present the information. Sometimes it's a half-day session where they are receiving direct instruction and then planning in the afternoon, and sometimes it's an all-day thing where they're actually collaborating throughout the day within that session. So the students aren't losing anything, but the teachers are certainly gaining and able to come in fresh so that they can receive the information, thus go back and implement the information.
I hate to belabor the point, but just so I'm clear, if we have 178 days in the calendar, your calendar would be 175.5.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure.
Okay,
1,025 hours.
And that's going to look different per school, because ours is similar, but our proposal is going to be more so that those optional days are not optional, that they're required for staff, because the state only requires us to have 2 optional days. And we're opting to have all of our days, with the exception of 2 days, to be required. In addition, we are looking at the additional time, but that's because of things that's built in our schedule to give them full additional 45 minutes of acceleration and remediation time. But it's also, we're looking at doing more than 178 days. So that the staff, because I know our minimum requirement is going to be 178 days that we want to have, but in our proposal that we're working on currently, it is to get up to 180 to 185 school days for students in addition to the hours, so that if time is lost, we can still have the professional development days that are in and they're not taken away, so we're covering both hours and days is the point that I wanted to make.
Thank you so much.
okay, I love all of that. I'm just going to throw that out there. I love the extra time, and this is probably just a newbie thing too, because in the back of my head, I've got buses and TAs on buses and office assistants on buses, and we're trying to get TAs and office assistants back in the schools. Will this affect transportation at all, Dr. Smith?
Dots together.
It
I'm
will
connecting
not.
dots.
What we have right now, we're already doing it, and it does not affect transportation because as a feeder pattern, we have already staggered our time for school, and so it does not affect transportation at all.
Thank you.
At the most, there may be a day that our students are in school, so there might be a day or two that our students may be in school, that everyone else is not in school, but it's not going to affect it to the fact that if we're not in school, someone's gonna lose time, because I understand it does affect classified staff. Whenever we're not working, their time is all factored into that.
Thank you.
Can I say that the 2.5 days that we're talking about here is not for 2021. It is for this current year. So we are already implementing what we have. This is already in the calendar. We're actually operating this right now.
See, that's why I asked the questions for clarification. Thank you.
Any questions, any more questions from Ms. Thomas or any administrator sitting in the room? Or even Mr. Baker, who has to get the turnover ratio for all over.
I do have a question. This one has no checks on it. Should it have checks on it?
I don't think there's anything we need to do on that one. For some, that was more informational.
Just
on that
double
one?
checking because everybody else has checks.
Yes, that's for an area we needed to go ahead and modify. Yes. Yeah, sure.
Mr. Sutton, you were referencing some changes to Senate Bill 522 earlier about how Restart, the ISD can come in and take over even now or Restart School. And just a point of clarification, I believe every principal in here will move our schools, so we don't have to worry with this, but you referenced Selma Middle as being on that list. North Johnston Middle is also on the list. They're like number 55. And the way the legislation's written, there's a time span that they would have to remain on the list, and we're planning to do a formal presentation to you guys at a later date on that. But just wanted that one clear.
Let me make one quick comment on it also. That recent legislation, there's no schools go into that next year. First one that would go in is in 2021, and it's only one school. It's the lowest performing school in the state. Any of ours are at least 6 or 7 to 10 years down the road before they'd even be considered. And knowing this group, it's not going to be a problem.
Just one last comment. You know, first of all, I want to congratulate all the folks who are here in this room. Change is not easy. You know, I'm all about change as long as it doesn't affect me. And so to be the leaders out there leading your teachers and your staff through this change process, I want to thank you for doing that. I know it's hard work. It isn't easy, but I believe that what you're doing is going to benefit children, so thank you.
And just one more point of clarification. All of the calendar flexibilities are just at your schools and not the feeder patterns, is that correct?
That conversation hasn't been decided yet, to be honest. That's going to be once we come up with our calendars. That again would be something we would present to the board and to our feeder pattern to see, as a feeder pattern, is this something you would like to be considered? And then we would bring that back to the board for approval.
Yeah, next month we'll bring you the suggested district-wide calendar, and then they will be meeting to decide on things to bring back to you as far as modifications for that. So you'll get a chance to vote on that before anything's final.
When I was in the Triple S feeder pattern, there were some restart schools in the feeder pattern, and we had a different calendar, a restart calendar. And I think a lot of that conversation, so I don't think it was just massive changes where we were all doing a lot of different things. I think a lot of the flexibility that I'm talking about is more, because I think we're very mindful of transportation, and not only that, if you have a student at the middle school or the elementary school or the high school, which I think is part of the reason it went to the whole feeder pattern. So I think we're mindful of that. I think a lot of it is about our work days, because we need our staff for the training and the PD and as effective and as hard as they're working. It's just getting them there and having those required days. And I think that was the conversation in the beginning when we had we required all those days, but there also has to be some perks. Because, you know, if I'm saying to people, you've got to be here all these days, the only one you can take off is that Friday. And I think that's where we tried to work some of those perks throughout the calendar as an incentive for them to want to be in those schools too, because you can't ask them to do more without those perks. And that was sort of the conversation. I know like one particular year they had the whole week off, you know, for Thanksgiving. So just, it wasn't you know, just to make the calendar so we have that vacation. But just being mindful that we're also asking them to do all of those days at the beginning and more required days during the year that they couldn't take off. So I think that was sort of the incentive to in exchange, say, come work all these days, because, you know, they're going to be going with these other schools. These teachers at other places have the option to take those days off. So I don't know about everyone else. For me, the calendar flexibility is just wanting to be able to require some PD on days, but not just having a, I mean, we still are mindful of the transportation and all those concerns for us, and I know every district is different, so I just wanted to clarify our original mindset.
Sanders, I appreciate you doing that. You sold me better than my wife did on the week of Thanksgiving, because we had that conversation last night. And, but that does make sense about the perks, because they are required to do more things. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because it does make very valid, point that they need some additional items because we can't pay them more. But we can give them things like this that they'll appreciate and want to stay at those schools rather than looking to transfer to another school. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And I can respect the other districts who, you know, that is a big thing where I'm coming to work for 2 days too. So there are some give and takes. I just, for me, as someone that was on the other committee, I just felt like I needed to kind of speak up that we're asking them to do more, even if we're asking them to work 180 days. You know, there has to be some give and take there, I think.
All good questions. Any more?
I'd like to add to the Thanksgiving, well said everyone, is we're really trying to diversify our staff. And so when you do that, you sometimes widen the circle that you're looking from. And so for me, that's about also not just a perk, you've been working hard to get the day off, but when you start recruiting people from further away, they have further to travel to go to their homes. And so we have people from outside the country, we have people from outside the state, and so in asking them to come here, for them to get to their families, to celebrate these holidays is one of the other reasons why you went to work.
And I think that's the reason the licensure flexibility is in these restart schools, because they are hard to staff sometimes. Because as great as we know that we are, when someone pulls up the website and isn't there and don't know the great things we're doing for children, that is what they see. So we have to, it's just different, you know, sometimes to encourage those to want to come there, because, you know, that's just one snapshot.
Any more questions? If not, entertain a motion to approve the annual reform model report.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Tracy Zukowski, second by Todd Sutton. Any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, administrators and staff. Appreciate you. Mr. Loris Gill.
Good evening, Chairman Wooten, Lady Vice Chair, Dr. Peggy Smith, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be with you today, as I would like to present some information as we move forward with our 2018 bond. And this is item Board Exhibit 2B1, the Clayton CTE renovation and the new athletics field house. This is the first phase of bond projects that are planned for Clayton High School from our 2018 bond referendum. The existing field house, concession stand, public bathrooms, and coach's office adjacent to the football stadium will all be consolidated into one large multi-purpose field house building. Renovation of the existing career and technical facility will begin in the summer of 2020. The planned renovation will bring that facility up to current building code standards with a metal roof retrofit, centralized HVAC systems, ADA compliant and adequate bathrooms, new finishes to better support the needs of the CTE department. Hyde Associate prepared the construction plans and the specifications for the project, utilizing the design principles of the USA Model Plan. Bids were received on October 31st, and you'll see the bid tabulation is attached. You will also see an additional letter from Height to me about negotiated pricing that we went through with our low bidder, which the low bidder for the project was Ferrier and Sons of Farmville, North Carolina, and for a total contract amount of $4,540,390. That is a net savings after negotiations, and you'll see those items that were listed on that sheet of $514,610. I'll also add that in working with this process, that they have been very agreeable, as we still have some time before the CTE building renovations begin, to continue to look especially at some of the cabinetry and millwork to recoup additional savings. But we would like to go ahead and recommend to award this contract to Ferrier and Sons and stay on schedule with this project. It's very important for us in the operations department, as well as the Clayton community, to have that field house ready for use for the football season, which means we really have to go ahead and get started. So I bring that to you for approval today, and we'll entertain any other questions.
Entertain a motion.
So moved.
I have a question.
Entertain a motion first.
So moved.
Motion by Teresa Grant,
Second.
second by Todd Sutton. Now you may ask your question.
How far under budget are we for this particular project when it comes to the bond money that we've set aside for this project? How far under or above budget are we with this?
We are not under budget for this particular project. We are actually over budget, and by the amount, I cannot tell you off of the top of my head. I did not bring that to you today. But we were... The process that we go through is that we have to be under, over, and be able to spread the money out. So what we do is we look at several projects and we look at whether they're coming under and over. Corinth Holders High School addition came in well under. The security vestibules came in somewhat higher. So then you're looking at this one. It is difficult. We had 4 bidders, but one of the things I will say is when you're getting into the renovation of an existing building with having to redo all of the electric, bring that up to code, as well as the bathroom fixtures, and what each one of our contractors bring with working with their subcontractors, that can escalate the pricing that we had originally set forth for this particular project. We were wanting, the things that we actually negotiated with them on were things that were actually things. One example I'll give you is in the new design for the field house, for example, it had a very large metal retrofit overhang to where you actually, almost like a porch is what I would call it. And there was quite a bit of savings, I want to say $211,000, just by not doing that overhang and moving that up and the columns up further. So from the product that the school will see, they will not see any differences, so to speak, with the particular negotiated pricing that we did. However, those were things that were prudent as we sat down and worked with that particular low bidder. So while I'm not answering your question, I'm happy to bring you those, but that was an estimate at that time when we set up the bond projects. They're never, it's market conditions always have a part to play when we bid those, and whether or not, and we do talk about whether or not we rebid. There have been projects in the past where we have pulled off, waited some time, put them back on to see if we can get some better pricing. But at this particular stage in the game, the marketing prices that we're seeing and with the amount of work we have out there, feel that this is probably the best way we can go at this time.
And I appreciate all that, but I think in the future, it would be important for us to see where we're at and what projects we have left to do, how much money we have saved over time, because this is bond money and we have a lot of projects that we want to manage. So I would like to see that in the future before we have to make a motion
Sure.
to go over
And
budget.
We're certainly happy to do that. We were not, it was certainly not something that we were anticipating that the project would be over budget to that extent. And I certainly can show you some of the estimates that we have for all of the projects, but they're estimates at the date and time that we do those based upon the market conditions when we create those. But it's always important. That's why when, for example, we come under budget, we don't necessarily look at that school and say, well, we had that amount of money allotted for this project, now let's spend up to that. We have to be very careful to balance it as the bonds are sold, so you spread the money out for the life of the projects that we do.
And I completely understand that. I don't want to spend up to, definitely, but when we're having to make decisions about going over budget, it's kind of nice to have the numbers to see where we've been under budget so we can see that we have that cushion, especially where we're at today. I think is
Right.
something we need to keep an eye on.
Yes, and Mr. Moore keeps up with that, and before we even proceed in looking and bringing anything to you, we also look to see, are we going into deficit for any of those projects? At this time, we are not, because of the back and forth between the projects we currently have out. But that means that we don't have as much of a cushion, and we have to be extremely careful in what we're doing. And I know that goes without saying that the construction department takes it extremely serious that we deliver the products that are on the actual bond listing of projects that we have. And we will do everything in our power to make sure we get those things right. That is one of the wonderful things about the ongoing relationship we have in working with Mr. Height, that we actually went through this process of actually saying we really need to see where we can make reductions, and we'll continue to do that during the course of this particular project.
I know when we were doing the LGC monies projects, we got something similar to what Tracy's talking about when we got updates. You know, this is over, this is under.
Right.
Seems like all the chillers ended up being over and all the roofs ended up being under, and it kind of balanced out at the end.
It did.
But it is nice to be able to see that how it's bouncing back and forth, because I think we ended up on track with the
Definitely
LGC
did.
monies.
We did. And you know, that money earned some sales tax money and over the course of that as well. So yes, we can certainly provide you that document and have that be an ongoing. Just bear in mind that we're just getting started with the projects, and this is probably our third project that we're doing, and we're now getting a better sense. Honestly, as we move towards potentially finalizing the purchase of property for a new elementary school, that's a big telltale sign in our mind as to how that particular bid comes in for new construction. That will give us a whole lot of ideas of how the money is going to flow, because that's a huge project as we move forward. And we would like to be close to that pretty soon as well. I may be going in the weeds a little bit with how we think, but just wanted to make sure we talk through it.
So, Ms. Gill, just to clarify, in the three projects we've got going on right now, we're not over budget cumulatively on those three, right? We still have some kind of cushion, but this right here is eating into our cushion by it being over, correct?
Well, and some of the things, like we went back with Mr. Hyde and took a look at some of our future projects and actually discovered there was one project in particular that the square footage, how much price per square footage, he had overextended that one. We also can look at some of our other projects that we have and decide whether or not we had put the right pricing on those. And Brooks knows that when we're trying to do those estimations, that he put some cushion in there, knowing about the variability. Quite frankly, we were a little more surprised about this particular number, but sometimes when people look at intensive renovations, the new construction part's pretty easy because it's based upon our model plan that we're very used to building. When you start tearing something up and starting all over and you don't know what you're going to get into, people start getting a little bit, and we do also, I will say, build contingencies into all the projects that we do for that particular reason, because you can get into some of these projects and they call you up and say, I've got to make a change order, or I've got to do something different. This is not how we plan. So also, as we complete more and more projects and we don't go into the contingency money that you set aside for each one of these projects, you get more and more healthy with your spending over time. You are absolutely welcome. Did we approve anything yet?
Any more questions before we vote, I need to recuse myself, conflict of interest, to Farrier and Sons, please. That being said, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Right. And the final thing I wanted to say is the first thing you will see on that project is we have to do quite a bit of demolition. And they were very interested in trying to do that as much as we possibly could during the Christmas holidays. We have our first pre-construction meeting pending board approval that we are certainly hoping to go ahead and get in before we get out for Christmas. We need to move forward. So we're excited. Thank you so much.
Entertain a motion to adjourn. That was quickest.